Welcome to Women at Halftime podcast, but not just for women, for you men too. If you're at mid-career or the halftime of life, our inspirational topics are not only fun, but also meant to help you maximize and write your next chapter. Right here with me, Deborah Johnson. Well, hello. Great to be with you today. We have this bonus episode. I'm so excited to bring back Allison Morrow. And we had an interview at least a couple of years ago. It was right during the shutdowns and the pandemic. And it's all about homeschooling. I was so impressed because she has this whole good schooling, all about homeschooling. And this is my focus is usually for those mid-career, halftime of life. But many are starting families later, but also grandparenting. What do you do when you've got all of this going on at the same time? How do you be a support to some of these decisions? And our educational system has kind of been in quite an uproar these days, and parents want to have more say. You do not take, liberties with a mom and a child. I just tell you, you just don't do that. You're going to have some angry moms that are, the dads too, of course, but there's just a lot of that in caring for our family. So thank you for being here again, Allison. It's just great to have you.
So much for having me. I'm glad to be back.
Yes, it's really fun. So to do this, and when we did this before, I didn't put out the video. This time I do. So everybody will be able to see your beautiful expressions, everything that you're doing. So give us a little bit background on good schooling and what you're doing, just to kind of catch everyone up if they have not heard of you or seen the previous podcast. And why don't you explain that for us?
Yeah, sure. So I actually got my start in education. I always wanted to be a teacher when I was a kid. And before I even got my degree, just the time that I spent doing my student teaching, I could already tell this system is really screwed up. And I mean, I'd gone through it. I've public school all the way, kindergarten through college, but being on the other side of the desk and being in the teacher meetings and all that really opened my eyes. And I realized that as much as I love teaching, I would never put my own kids in those seats. And so my husband and I, we met, we got married, we had kids, and we had this plan. Hey, we are going to homeschool. It was a plan from the beginning. And I thought, okay, and how hard can it possibly be? Because I'm a teacher. So I know all this stuff. This will be, if I can do a class of 25, I can do 2, no problem, And then we had the 2 worst years of our life. Homeschooling was an absolute disaster. It was such a nightmare. And I'm like, what are we doing wrong? How can we be getting this wrong when I'm a teacher? And we came through the other side of those 2 years intact and still homeschooling by the grace of God, and looked back and thought, we've got to figure out why this was so hard, because certainly we're not the only ones that have these struggles. And we've got to figure out what could have made it easier. And that was the beginning of good schooling, just looking back and kind of analyzing why it was so hard, the struggles we had, why they were struggles, and then systematizing the whole homeschool launch, kind of thinking back and saying, if we had done this and this and this and this, it would have been a million times better. And so that was kind of our first product, was kind of a how-to homeschool manual. And everything ever since then has just been focused on helping people make that transition, learning from the mistakes, all the mistakes that we made, all the lessons that we have learned over, my oldest is now 17. So we're going through high school and everything now. And so just taking everything that we've learned, everything, all of our struggles, all of our frustrations, all of our aha moments, and turning those into assistance for other families so that they do not have to have the struggles that we had.
It's wonderful that you come from an educational background. And actually, even though I'm an entertainer, have been for years, I have a huge educational background, taught every single level. And, but it's, I think it's wonderful when you put a program together and you know what people will need, and you need what you can see, how maybe this is portrayed to someone as a student and as a teacher, and you're not afraid to do the work. Right. It's a lot of work. I tell you, my hats go off to those teachers. It's a lot of work to be teaching and to keep up with, a number of students. And then when you have kids, they're underfoot and you see those little personalities, coming out, and you're thinking, oh, can I even survive this? And so, yeah, there's just a lot to that. And so you started Good Schooling, and it was all about unschooling as well. So just explain a little bit of that. And then I want you to go into kind of what new that you have developed, just maybe even in the last 2 years, because I will link this to the article that I've already written in the past, but I'm going to update a few things. But I want people to know since that time where you have come to and all about unschooling.
Sure. So, the biggest thing that I found, and I think when you're saying unschooling, I think what you're actually referring to is deschooling.
Oh, deschooling. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's okay.
I'm not a homeschooler now.
And yes.
I did though.
People kind of will use those terms interchangeably with, and you kind of can't actually, deschooling is actually, it's kind of like short-term unschooling. So unschooling is homeschooling kind of without anything that looks like school. Basically, it's using life to teach your kids and letting them kind of guide themselves through what they want to do. And deschooling is like doing that in the short term. And the reason we deschool is because it acts like a detox for kids and parents who've been in the public school system. The vast majority of parents, that's their experience was either public school or private school. And private school, in most cases, it looks a lot like public school. It's just, with uniforms, and so it's that same very conventional approach to education that really puts learning in this very small and narrow box and says, this is what learning has to look like. And when kids have been in that environment for a long time, it takes away a lot of their natural curiosity because they have no reason to use it. When you walk into a classroom, the teacher tells you, we're learning this. We're learning it this way, and here's what you're going to do with it. And so the child has no need to be curious. They have no need to ask questions beyond, how do I do this particular assignment? And so when their natural curiosity shrinks, it makes learning completely uninteresting. Like the whole reason we learn is because we get curious. And we say, I wonder, how does that work? Or what was that? Or why did that happen? And so we go learn. And so when we pull our kids out of that system, their creativity and their natural curiosity have completely atrophied. And so by spending time deschooling, it allows them to reignite and rediscover that natural curiosity, that drive to learn that we've all been wired with. And when you help parents go through that, what it helps them do is open up their minds to all of the possibilities and all of the creative and flexible ways that we can homeschool. Homeschooling is such an incredibly huge body of possibility. Like the whole world is your classroom. But in order to really fully grasp how exactly that's going to work, you really need to deschool yourself as a parent. And so that actually was one of the biggest lessons that I learned through those 2 years of miserable homeschooling in the beginning for us. I had not deschooled. And so I came into our homeschool as a school teacher, and I was going to school my children. And so that was the approach that we took. And my children are not the kind of children that thrive in that kind of environment. And so it was like, from the very beginning, we were fighting. And so when I learned what deschooling was and I started going through deschooling myself, that was when my own homeschooling really opened wide open. And I started to see all of the different ways that not deschooling can negatively impact your homeschool. And so when I started working with homeschoolers, I'd realize, oh gosh, this issue they're having, I bet they haven't deschooled. And I bet this issue is because they haven't deschooled and their kids haven't deschooled. And so that actually is one of my most favorite products that I've created over the last couple of years since the whole lockdown thing was I created the deschooling experience. And it's specifically for parents. I have an article on my blog that talks about how you can help your kids deschool, but I didn't have anything for parents. And so I created this, and it's a 12-week program where parents get an email once a week, and it leads them through a video, and it leads them through some readings and a couple of books that I kind of assign, and then some very targeted, specific kind of thinking activities for them, kind of journaling activities that help them to kind of deconstruct all of their thoughts about education and rebuild them with this completely new worldview about what education really was meant to be and how we can do it outside of that system that's very narrow. So that whole deschooling experience and all of the things that happen with deschooling were one of the really big kind of things that have happened in just this last couple of years. And then that ended up leading into the other product that I created that I'm really excited about, which is actually a whole approach to homeschooling called simplified homeschooling.
Wow.
And the more time that we spend deschooling, the more that we realize that learning does not have to come with all this stuff. Like a lot of what our kids need to do is because, well, that's what colleges require. If we didn't have the college system, they wouldn't need half of this stuff. And it's not that colleges are so desperate for it. It's just they come up with these really weird and arbitrary, like, tell me why every single child needs to know geometry. Like, we should know angles. We should understand some of the basics, but to be able to do all of these formulations and all of these equations, the average person is not going to use that beyond, maybe if you're building a bookshelf, you got to know your angles. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so if we didn't have all of these kind of arbitrary requirements from colleges, we would be able to homeschool our children with so much more confidence a lot of times and so much more freedom because we'd really be able to kind of let our children chase the things that they really love. But we do have these requirements, and states will have requirements that, families have to follow. And so simplified homeschooling kind of marries the unschooling approach of letting your kids really just follow the things that they love, kind of marries that with that side of homeschooling where parents kind of have to say, we just have to learn this stuff. I'm really sorry. I know you're not super interested, but it has to be done, and helps parents figure out how to do those subjects and do those things in a way that are still going to be engaging for kids, and really kind of balances out the teacher/parent led kind of stuff and the kid, delight driven kind of education. And it brings both of those together in a way that helps families kind of balance both of those and give their kids a really great education while still having lots and lots of freedom.
What a wonderful introduction to that. And I know one of the best ways to teach is to develop a love for a subject. I have taught since I was the age of 13. Mm-hmm. I know this extremely well, especially in music, but in a lot of other places too. When you develop that love, there's that self-motivation, and a lot of what your graduate work, everything else is, that I had to go through too. It's how to research, how to do the work, and the discipline in that. And so to learn those disciplines, I know angles, but it's, I've applied angles to life skills. It's not to just doing an equation. So if you have a project that you have to use a certain, that makes it much, much more personal and with each child. And it sounds like a whole lot of work, but I think when you say simplify, I think there's a real mindset there. And I'm big on mindsets. That's so much of what we deal with, even in, asking what's next. There's a lot to that with mindsets. Give us a little idea. We didn't really talk about how many people are homeschooling right now. I just know I get information on these homeschool conferences because I've done some work with them.
Sure.
And they fill up. They're huge conferences. Yeah. So, and they do them all regionally and all of that. And I think I have some of those links probably in the article. Hopefully I will. I'll make sure those are in there. But what were the numbers? You knew the numbers like at the pandemic time, but it has not slowed down.
Oh my goodness. It's been absolutely amazing. At one point, and I know when we first really came out of it, I'd say like 2021, there were a couple of states where literally 25 to 30% of kids were homeschooled. I mean, that's absolutely unbelievable. And what's happened is, the curtain got pulled back on public school.
Right.
And a lot of parents were horrified at what was going on in the classroom and realized I can't send my kid back to this. And so obviously there were quite a few people that went back, who sent their kids back a lot because they really didn't feel like they had a choice. Like, I work full time. I can't, I wasn't ready to do this in the first place, but it has remained very, very high. And in fact, and I find this fascinating, the two populations where we're seeing the most growth in homeschooling is in the Black community and the Latino community.
Wow.
Which, praise God, I think is so fantastic, because those are the two communities that really see the worst of the whole school to prison pipeline. Like it's a thing and it's horrible. And for those kids to be finally getting out of that system, it is so fantastic to see these parents saying, enough of this. I'm not putting up with this anymore. I'm bringing my kids home. We're going to figure out how to do it. And, I think that sacrifice, it is so hard to make. There's so many families who had to make so many sacrifices,
right.
When the pandemic hit, just to do like the whole crisis schooling thing where their kids were on Zoom for like 4 hours a day with teachers, and, parents are trying to make sure, they stay connected and they're doing the work and all this stuff. And I know a lot of parents really panicked at that point because they thought that was homeschooling, like, that everything would be online and that they had to sit there and work with their kids on this stuff and be on the computer all the time. And a lot of parents, most parents didn't realize that when you make that transition from school into homeschooling, that you really have to have that whole deschooling process. And that when you do, it makes it so much easier. And so I know that the reason a lot of parents kind of went back, to school or let their kids go back to school was because they were like, oh, this is a mess. I wish I could homeschool, but I'm just not cut out for it. We had a horrible time. We obviously weren't meant to be homeschoolers. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do since the pandemic is try to help parents see that, okay, 99% of the problem you were having was the fact that you hadn't deschooled first. And it was a crisis situation. Even homeschoolers were going crazy during the pandemic. Like at first we were like, oh yeah, that's fine. We're used to this, welcome to our world. No big deal. But it wasn't our world because so many homeschoolers do not stay home.
There's support groups. This is what people don't understand.
Yes.
When we were homeschooling I only did it for a certain amount of time with our sons, but they are very social. They were kind of introverts anyway, but we had a lot of social activity and had support groups. Mm-hmm. And I think those are such an important part. But yes, when you get the shutdowns, all of a sudden everything's shut down, and that's different.
Yeah.
You really need that support with each other. Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of parents, I'm in a million, mom groups on Facebook for like local area and stuff like that. So many moms were saying, okay, we had our kids home during the pandemic. We sent them back, but I'm starting to rethink it. I think I want to homeschool. I think I want to bring them back, but it was such a nightmare. I can't imagine doing it. So it's great. I'm seeing parents who are starting to see already, gosh, the homeschooling thing, maybe it's worth looking into again. And so it's exciting to have the opportunity to be able to say, listen, what your experience was before does not have to be what your experience is this time. This time you have the opportunity to do it right, to prepare yourself. It's not you wake up one day and all of a sudden your kids have to stay home. Being able to make the choice and prepare yourself and get ready for it makes all the difference in the world. So I think because of that experience, even though, we saw a fair number of people go back to public school, I think we're going to continue to see homeschooling rise way faster than it was. And it was already percentage was already rising pretty quickly, but I think we're going to see an even greater surge of homeschoolers in the next 10 years, solely because we had so many parents who did it during the lockdown and kind of got that taste. And for those of them who were able to, kind of glimpse the possibility of that stays in the back of their mind. And so when their kids start struggling or they get really frustrated with their school, they start thinking, that homeschooling thing, maybe it's worth looking at again. And a lot of them are starting to do that and pull their kids out again.
And it's interesting because, learning styles are different. Classrooms are huge right now. And also the things that they're teaching, kids they learn so fast. Mm-hmm. They learn really, really fast. And I think that was one of my frustrations, how fast they learned. It's like, how much more all they want to do now is to see how they can bother me, or, what are we doing next? What are we doing next? but it was enlightening to see how quickly they do learn. And these kids that go through these programs, and there's so many online programs too, with like the Abeka video programs and all of they're structured, because some kids just love watching those videos and listen. And actually, I've got two granddaughters, and they started into the Abeka this year. Now, back when I was homeschooling, I felt like it was too structured and all of that sort of stuff. Apparently, it's changed. I've not been on it, and I've not even studied it, but they love it. They are, and learning and reviewing on that, and so it gives another manner of help for at least some of the basics, because reading is extremely important. The basics of math is extremely important. And every kid learns different language, and all of that within the curriculum. And then history, there's so many things that our kids now, there's a lot of schools that want to cancel a lot. So now you have confusion. Okay, one year the teacher told me this. Now the next year they're telling me something else. And did you say, no, that's real now? Or there's this confusion, and we have these young learners that are, you want to make it interesting for. So there's just so much to that. And I love the simplifying, because I tell people now to be creative is to be able to simplify, because some people wonder, how can you be more creative in your life? Well, figuring out how to simplify something too makes you be creative.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah. It forces you to think totally outside the box.
Right.
And I think that one of the reasons why our creativity gets stifled is because we've got so much going on, and there's no room for your creativity to go. Like you've got all these things, all these bits and pieces, and all these, things you got to put together to make this thing work. If you can simplify it, it frees up so much more energy and mental real estate and time. And I think one of the things that I love the most about homeschooling is how much time it gives you, but not if you cram it in with all of this stuff. And I think that was one of the reasons why I started coming up with simplified homeschooling, was because I would talk to so many families who would post things like, am I doing enough? And they'd list thing out. And I'm like, oh my word, how much time are you spending at the kitchen table every day? That's the crazy amount. I'm like, slow it down, And I think the reason they do that is because they think, well, okay, if my child is in school, these are all the things that they're doing in school, so I should be doing them too. And what people, fail to realize is that the public school system, it needs to justify having children there as long as possible. And so they cram more and more and more. And knowledge is great, and exposure to stuff is great. And we want our kids to, to be, to have a variety of information and to have thought broadly and deeply and all these things. But at some point it gets a little ridiculous, and when we pile all this stuff on top of our kids, they just suffocate. And so by freeing them up and saying, hey, we're going to focus on the basics, and then we're going to have all this extra time where we can go deep dive into the totally cool random stuff that you love, So you focus on the 3 R's. Actually, I tend to say the 4 R's, because reading, writing, arithmetic, and reasoning. And
I like that.
So that's kind of what the foundation of simplified homeschooling is, are those 4 things, which we then apply to science and history and philosophy and worldview and recreation and rest and all of these different things, so that, yes, they're getting that solid base, but then they have all of this time that they can go then apply those skills to the things that they find fascinating. So they've got all this time, and the parents can say, they can make whatever requirements they need to make based on their state or what the parent feels is really important. Like, I really need you guys to understand, American history. I really need you guys to understand whatever, fill in the blank, but they've got this time to be able to say, so how do you want to learn about it? What do we want to watch? Some documentaries? Do we want to read some historical fiction? Do we want to go, to the museum? Do we want to Is there a particular aspect of, this particular time period or this particular area of science that you really want to, kind of noodle around in and just watch a bunch of random stuff on and see what we can learn? It gives you this freedom to be able to say, let's just follow the rabbit trails and see where they go. And that's where the best learning happens, because then the kids get to do what they're really excited about and they get to chase things all over the place. And that learning really, really sticks. But you can't do that if you've got this giant checklist of, we have to do all these things, all these things, all these things. And that's what public education is. We have to do all these things so that, we can take the test in the spring and everyone's going to pass. And, it's going to pass. And then they're going to jettison all that information for next year so they can fill their brains up with a whole other year's worth of stuff that really doesn't mean all that much to them,
Right. I love reasoning. And I've done several podcasts on this and I've written on it and just the importance of thinking for yourself. Mm-hmm. And there's so many copycats and clones in our world. And when you're looking at education, to be able to think, to be able to reason, to be able to say, that makes sense and why it makes sense. And then you have adults eventually that will be able to reason and just to say, that decision doesn't make sense ethically. And that's why they're asking me to do that. That decision doesn't make sense in business because it's not going to be profitable. That decision makes sense. Those sort of things, to be able to reason, to be able to identify some of those things for themselves as you raise eventually adults to your kids. So now, what are the things that you decided, you hit on this just a little bit, but what are the things in the past couple of years you've decided to not do, that you've said no to, because that's one of the principles of time management. What do you not do? And it will free up your time. So there are some things, that you decided not to do. And what were some of those, to be specific?
Oh gosh. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I decided not to do was to not keep fighting with my kids over doing school the way I wanted them to do school. This was something that took a long time for me to reconcile, was the fact that my children do not learn the way that I do. And, my ideal education, my ideal approach to homeschooling for what I wish I would have done as a kid is not what's going to fit them. And there was a long period of time where I was just convinced we had to do school this way. And it would have been a great education. It wasn't like, I'm glad I'd stopped doing that because it would have been awful. It would have been fantastic, but that's not how they learned. And it was a big lesson for me to realize I need to let go of this. I need to give my kids more autonomy. I need to give them more agency. I need to allow them to be who God has made them to be and stop trying to stuff them into the box that I wanted their education to be. And so for one of my daughters, that actually meant giving up control of her education and letting her go to a hybrid school. And that was a huge decision because I'm like, I'm a homeschool coach. I should be homeschooling my own kids. Hello, but I finally had to realize what is best for this child is to be in an environment with some other people. And luckily it's a program. And if it were not this kind of program, we would not have done it. But it is a program where there is a lot of flexibility. I, as a parent, can say, I'm excusing her homework this week because, fill in the blank. And it could just be because we're having a big family week with, stuff going on, or families coming in town or whatever. And so I am able to say, we're just not going to do this stuff this week. And eventually when she finishes high school, I'll still be the one making her transcript, and I'll be combining it with, the things she did there, the things she did before she went there, things that we've been doing, kind of outside of that system. So it's a system that still gave us a lot of flexibility, but it really helped our relationship for her and I to kind of have a little bit of distance, but for me to realize, what, this child is not me. And I think it's a hard thing for a lot of parents to finally realize when they start seeing all the exciting things about homeschooling. They start imagining, oh, if only I had been homeschooled. And so then, they start kind of creating the homeschool that they want.
Yes.
But not your homeschool. It's your kids' homeschool. It's your kids' education. And so finally giving that up and saying, okay, I'm willing to take my hands off of this part and let you have this. We still have requirements for things that she has to do before she graduates that are kind of in our home. But letting go of that so that I could prioritize the relationship with her was really important, because I want her to be able to trust me. I want us to have a good relationship so that when she goes off to college, it's on good terms and we're still communicating and everything's still good, So giving that up was one thing. And then another thing was giving up this idea that I had to make sure that my children were all doing the same thing. And, I think a lot of times, particularly if you have a lot of kids, it makes it a lot easier to homeschool if you just say, we're all going to do this. And in some cases, that's just what you have to do. Like one of my friends, she homeschools 6 children. When you got 6 kids, like you just kind of have to put your foot down sometimes and say, we're all doing this. And that's just how it is,
Mm-hmm.
But as they get older and they have more independence, they have the ability to kind of do school on their own a little bit. They don't need you as much. To start allowing them to let their education look more like them and not kind of this blanket thing that you put on all of your kids. And even to say my graduation, like our homeschool graduation requirements for this child are not the same as they are for this child, because y'all are 2 completely different people and you're going in very different directions. And it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to require that you do the same thing as you when you guys are going in completely different directions. So letting go of that idea that I have to have everything uniform across the board for everybody, and recognizing that our children's not just independence, but their uniqueness, their individuality really needs to play a part in what their education looks like. And that can be a hard thing to grasp too, because we're so used to thinking of particularly things like graduation requirements as being an across the board thing. When you go to school, everybody in that school has to do the same thing essentially in order to graduate. But in homeschool, we don't have to do that. Even in states where there's a lot of regulation, you still have a fair amount of flexibility. And to be able to say, okay, the school, the state requires that we study this, but within this, we've got all of these different little things. Which one do you want to do? And which one do you want to do? And yes, sometimes it does mean more work. Sometimes it's less simplified for the mom because the mom now has to differentiate all the instruction, but it gives kids the education that they need, that is customized to them and that is going to fit them best. So that one is, in some ways, it's a little bit of a step backwards in terms of the simplifying, but I think in terms of the eventual outcome, it is so worth it because it gives them the ability to truly figure out who they are and chase the things that really excite them.
Yeah. And when you look as a parent at homeschooling, sometimes you're thinking, oh, it's overwhelming because there's so much work. If you've got to do, each kid different, you've got to, all of this.
Right.
But as you said, you've got one daughter that went into the hybrid situation. It was our middle son that thrived in the classroom. Yeah. And I had homeschooled him. And our 2 oldest were just, there's such a difference in the ability to do phonics in a lot of areas because I homeschooled him more. Our youngest would have thrived in the home as a homeschool but I was just at that point, I think I didn't understand what the middle one really needed. And I did have a district that would have worked a little bit even more with me. And so that I felt fortunate with that and had a good support group. We moved right at one of those times too in location. So there's a lot of variables for people when they're making some of these decisions. But when they decide, and many grandparents want to step in and help and do part of that schooling. And
great.
It's wonderful. And that's what I could do with my granddaughters with music. I do not teach beginners anymore. I haven't for years, but I will teach my granddaughters and they will not find a better teacher. I've taught for so many years and it's very, very quality. I've put out online courses too, so you can find some of that, but that personal touch. Yeah. And I know their style of learning. One of the gals, she's a pattern girl. She's old enough now. And I told her, you're a pattern girl. You're going to do patterns. And she excels in it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so we'll see what the next one does. I have a feeling she might be a melody girl. So we'll do some of that. But and I have them singing right along. So, you need some of those skills. It's just wonderful for them. And grandparents can do something specific. Yes. And what is your skill? It might be cooking. That's not my skill, by the way. So it could be
me neither.
But I have two sisters who are amazing cooks. And, those are the sort of things, entertaining. It could be quilting. It could be almost anything. It could be even in business, something in business. And it could absolutely be, training those, and you see a little bit of a bent there. Mm-hmm. And so that is something you specifically can give to, one of your offspring, which is such a gift. And it just takes time. It takes time and commitment too, as a grandparent. So, but I think that's wonderful as you learned going along, and your kids have done apparently very well going all the way through. There are a lot of these kids from, what I've studied and what I've seen, they are at the top of the class. They have no problem in being able to excel academically, but they're also with the reasoning skills and with the life skills that they've got are amazing. You're not in this herd going along trying to find your way and deal with the bullying and deal with all of the extra things that they're putting into these schools that are not even the basics. They're just all of these other things that now the requirements, and why are you spending time on that? And so, exactly. Yeah. And so anyway, well, let's get to, I think you've given some good words of advice. I want maybe a little bit more as we kind of start drawing to a close. Here, I just ate lunch. I'm so sorry for people that are listening to me, but as we record this, and but some of the things that you would advise somebody that's just thinking about this, or maybe somebody that's really kind of burnt out already, or thinking that I just can't do that, because I have heard that a lot. Oh, I'm not a teacher. It's almost like if you've been a teacher, it's almost a hindrance a little bit, because you're not open to new ways of learning or really studying your kids. And Absolutely. You've got everything it takes. You really do. And I tell my daughter-in-law sometimes with the music, because she said, I never had music growing up. And I just tell her, I said, all you need to do is make sure they practice. She knows what to do. She knows exactly what to do. I make sure she knows. You just time her. That's all you need to do. Turn on the timer. So those are things. These kids are smart. And so what sort of advice would you give?
Well, to the parent who is just kind of starting to look at it and is probably thinking, I don't know that I have what it takes, but, there's stuff going on at school and I just can't take the thought of sending my kid there anymore. And I just don't know what else to do. Like you said, you have everything it takes. Homeschooling is just an extension of parenting. When our kids are babies, we have no problem with the idea of being their teacher. And we're teaching them very important things like how to function, like how to dress yourself and how to eat and how to talk. And, and just because we make this shift into academics does not mean that, oh, nope, suddenly I'm all out of my, I'm out of my league. This isn't, above my pay grade. I'm just a parent. Well, no, you're still somebody who is intelligent yourself, who has educated yourself, and who knows how to find the help that you need. And so just like with anything else that we do in our lives as adults, you start out, and when you have a problem, you troubleshoot, you problem solve, and you ask for help. And it's literally no different. When you start homeschooling, start by doing some research, and good schooling has, this is my jam, is helping parents make that transition. So I've got a bunch of free stuff on my website. I have my paid programs you can go through if you really want like the step-by-step handholding, which not everybody needs, but for those who want it, we've got it. It is not as overwhelming as you think. The reason it looks overwhelming is because it's kind of like moving to a foreign country. There's this whole language and culture and customs and, things that you've never interacted with. And so it all feels very foreign, but also, like when you go to a foreign country, if you just immerse yourself and give it a week or so, you start to figure it out and you go, oh, okay, now I see how this works. Now I'm getting the feel for it, but you got to dive in. Like you can't just like stand on the outside and expect that eventually it's going to make sense. You've got to get in the water and start swimming before you start figuring it out. And then for the parent who is feeling like they're already burnt out, there are definitely some specific things that tend to contribute to burnout. A lot of them are cured with DeSchooling. And that's another reason why I'm so big on DeSchooling, because it is a way to help yourself not get burnt out. I think, we burn ourselves out because we put so much expectation on ourselves and on our kids. And when we put expectations on them in particularly, especially if they're not the kind of personality that, works the way that we're trying to get them to work, that's when you start getting all this contention. And that contention is where a lot of that frustration and that burnout comes from, because every day you wake up, here comes another fight. This kid will just not do their work and it's driving me crazy. And, but once you have deschooled and you start to see, okay, the reason my child doesn't want to do this is because I keep pushing this way, but they're this kind of kid. Oh, okay, well, let's try going in this direction. Suddenly you're going with the current instead of against it, and everything is so much easier. So if you're burnt out, if you're homeschooling, you're burnt out, I always say, just take the semester off. And if that means, if you're in a state where you can't really take the semester off, you go to like the barest bones that you possibly can. And guess what? Like your children will continue to learn and they will be okay. Like it is okay if you're not going a million miles an hour on the hamster wheel every single semester. That's what's burning you out. You have to take that time to step away from that and deschool yourself, and also reconnect with the reasons why you're doing this in the first place. Like so many families will say, well, I want to homeschool because I want the freedom. But then they load their family and their kids up with a million things and they have no freedom, because every single minute of their day, there's something they're doing. We've got all this work, and then we have to go to scouts, and then we have to go to baseball, and then we have to go to this and this. And sometimes you just have to take everything off the calendar and say, this is going to be a semester of rest. Like we're just not doing all the stuff. We need a breather. We are all burnt out. We're exhausted. We're mad at each other all the time. Like this is not why we wanted to homeschool. And so when you remember back to the things that brought you to homeschooling in the first place, and then realize, okay, those are still my values. I still believe those things. Those things are still important to me. So we need to go back to the beginning and figure out how to keep those things front and center and rebuild this thing in a way that we're all working as a team instead of working against each other. We're simplifying everything, bringing it back to the basics. We're not piling, 9 different subjects or classes on every single day, and rediscovering what the whole purpose was of this in the first place, which for a lot of families is spending more time together, making faith the kind of the center of what they were trying to do, and give their kids a great education without completely burning them out, which you've just done because you're also trying to do what they do in public school. So it's that deschooling process again of getting all that junk out of your brain, all of the, we have to do it this way, we have to do it this way, and reconnecting with why you're doing this in the first place. And when you do that, you will see huge changes, huge.
There's your purpose, and it really equates quite a bit with deciding to go the entrepreneurial route for many, especially at mid-career. They say, I've always wanted to do this. I've always wanted to start my business, or I wanted to start a nonprofit. I see all of this. And, I'll have all this freedom. And there's a lot of articles out about this now, but there's a lot of reality of burnout and thinking, I was never made for this. Are you kidding? That's why you dip your toe in. And, I encourage people starting, a little side business or whatever. But there are things, I think, if you're interested, just to at least see, some of the materials that are out there and looking at your deschooling, getting acquainted with some of the programs that are even available is important to do some of that research. And I mean, you've been an author as well. I read at least one of your books. What else? You've written, I don't know how many of novels, actual novels, really well written. And yeah, but you've come from that background of being an author, of being an educator, and now understanding with your kids, it's given you this, this experience. You've been in the water with them, and it's the live lab experience. And so you've come out of that with such valuable information. So I think some of the things that you have shared, how can people then, I'm sure the information is very similar to what we had before, but why don't you speak, how people can get a hold of you really on the podcast so they can hear it as well. And maybe one of the first couple things that they should check out.
Absolutely. Yes. So goodschooling.net, that's my website. When you go to the website, it actually will kind of start you off on one of two paths. And it'll say, which one of these things do you need? And you just click the button and follow that. And so on the one hand, we have guides, which I used to call it my blog, and I still occasionally call it that, just kind of out of habit, but it's not really a blog so much as a collection of guides. And so I have a how to homeschool guide, 5 steps right there. Just follow this and this will get you started. DeSchooling. What, why, and how? What is this? How does it work? Why is it so important? Homeschooling in the early years. I've kind of thought about kind of the big questions that people have. How do I homeschool if I have to work? How do I homeschool a child with special needs? So I've got, I think it's something like 9 or 10 different guides that parents can follow there. And then I have resources, and the resources, I've got some that are free. I've got some that are paid, things like the DeSchooling experience, the simplified homeschooling framework, for families who are looking for that real handholding and they're starting right at the beginning. I have something called the Confident Homeschooling Solution, and it's the DeSchooling program and the simplified homeschooling framework. And it's also Launch Your Homeschool, which walks you through those 5 steps of how to homeschool, but does it with a lot more information and more resources for families. So I've got that. And then I've got my YouTube channel. So I just started doing that about a year and a half ago. And I love doing that because I get to do this. I get to just talk about all the things about homeschooling. So, if you're still kind of in that kind of homeschool curious, I call it, or prospective homeschooler, like you've decided you're going to do it, you just haven't quite made the leap yet. My channel is fantastic because it answers all the questions and it goes into specifics on all sorts of things. And it's just a great way to kind of, when you get that doubt or that fear or that, but what about this kind of question, you can go on there and chances are I've got a video about it. And they're nice and short. I keep them short and quick so that people can, get through that information and go find the next thing. But those 2 things are really my best resources, the channel and then my website, goodschooling.net, really the best places to go.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This has just been so much fun. And you're an educator. So it's at heart, but yet you're a parent. And how old are all of your kids now? You have a 17-year-old and
17 and almost 15. So they're both in high school now, which is crazy.
Yeah. So, and many times, you can do that combination to where they can be in sports, they can be in, dance, whatever.
We do all the things.
There's a lot of programs and there's a lot of freedom then when your schooling is right alongside that, and a lot of freedom to be able to do that and to really develop discipline. I am not a dancer at all. I can't even touch my toes. But my granddaughter, my actual daughter, one of my daughter-in-laws did grow up with dance, so those girls are in dance. And I tell you, I have seen the discipline and the ability. And one of the things I always tell them when they say, "Oh, this is hard," I said, "It's only hard if you don't practice."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Period. That's it.
Yep.
I've not given you something too hard. It's only hard when you don't practice. So there is just that confirmation for almost anything they're in. Mm-hmm. And it's only hard if we don't do the steps and do the work in our businesses. How about that?
Just like everything else, it's just life.
It's just life.
It's just life.
And those reasoning skills, very important. So, well, Allison, thank you again. And for those you who have now clicked in, maybe even for the first or a couple times, make sure that you connect with me as well. You can get me on a number of websites. My main three are goalsforyourlife.com, DeborahJohnsonSpeaker.com, and DJWorksMusic.com. Everybody loves the music. I have a lot of product as well. So, and thank you again for being with me, Allison. And
thank you so much, Deborah.
This was great fun. And for everyone else, I'll look forward to being with you again next time. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you for joining us. It is because of our wonderful listeners like you that we keep going strong week after week. We'd love it if you'd share and follow us to not miss a single show and even write a review. You can also find all of our articles, products, and links at womenathalftime.com.